Okay. Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. We're about to start today's Gala webinar. Just waiting a couple of seconds so that everybody can log in. So please sit tight. See a lot of known names and faces from the Gala membership. While we're waiting for everybody to log in, why don't you go ahead and write in the chat where you are joining us from, and whether you're already using inclusive language, inclusive terminology in your workplace, in your team, in your company, or simply in everyday life. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay, we're ready to go. All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's Gala webinar. My name is Isabella Massardo. I'm a content strategist here at Gala, and today we're going to talk inclusive language and electronic arts with Amanda Hawthorne, inclusive language specialist. But before we start, I invited my colleague Alicia, our membership manager, because she has some very exciting news. So Alicia, over to you.
All right. Hello and good morning or good evening. As Isa mentioned, we have some exciting news and it's related to this webinar today. So as we've been seeing the changes here at Gala, inclusive language and inclusive terminology isn't just a trend. It's a fundamental change in how we communicate and how businesses want to communicate with one another and with their employees. And we've been seeing an increase in these topics here at Gala, from the webinar programs to the conference to articles that are submitted. And we are so excited to announce that in January, we will be launching a special interest group focusing on inclusive language and terminology. And as Gala members, we invite you all to join it. We'll have a few other new special interest groups launching this year or at the start of 2023. So I just want to encourage you right now, if this is a topic that you're interested in, that you stay aware of our communications around it. So when we do our kickoff meeting, that you're able to attend this. And if you aren't familiar with Gala's special interest groups, they are a once a month, normally, some meet at every other month or once a quarter, meetings with our membership, where you actually have the chance to come together and discuss current issues within a subcategory such as this, like inclusive language. So we'll have a few other ones kicking up, including quality management, interpreting, multimedia localization. And so I really want to encourage you to think about it. And if, again, you're here today, Amanda is actually going to be part of this special interest group as well. So I highly encourage you, be aware of those communications. You can email me at membership@gala-global.com if you are interested and just want to say that you're interested now, so I can make sure to inform you as soon as the sign up to join the group launches. So I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. So just very quickly, you know how the drill goes. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A. So please feel free to use the Q&A box and send all your questions. And I would invite you to do so throughout the presentation. Don't wait at the last moment. And the webinar will be recorded. I will send a follow-up email with the recording as soon as it is published, usually within 24 hours. So I'm going to shut up now and I'm going to give the floor to Amanda Hawthorne. And I'll be back later. Thank you. Go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to speak, and thanks to everyone who's come along to listen to what I'll be saying today. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, but it's really just a guide through what I'll be talking about. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Okay, so I've called this our inclusive language origin story. So as I said, my name is Amanda Hawthorne. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Inclusive Language Specialist at Electronic Arts. What I'm going to be going through, and there's going to be plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So I'm just going to do a quick bio and then turning things on its head a little bit. I'm going to start at the end by talking about the results that we've accomplished so far, and then talking about what inclusive language is, so trying to define it so we're all on the same page. I'll introduce you to our team of inclusive language task force members, and then also talking about what our approach to inclusive language is. And I think this will be quite useful as well, some of the challenges that we've faced, and then also what we have planned for the future. And like I said, plenty of time for questions at the end. So I am going to continue. So with my biography, so my background is in learning and education. So I actually started at Electronic Arts earlier this year in February as an inclusive language specialist. And before that, I was working for 10 years at a global educational charity, focusing on teaching English, where I also had a role in equality, diversity and inclusion. I was also a facilitator, and I've been trained as a trainer. Back when I was based in London, and I was a trainer in local government, then project manager as well. What else I wanted to mention is that I've got 15 plus years of diversity inclusion experience. So also dating back to when I first, so 15 years, over 15 years, I'm talking about voluntary and paid work experience. A lot of diversity inclusion work is often voluntary, unfortunately, and that's how I got started in this whole area. I volunteered for a local LGBTQ plus charity in London, where I go into schools and give talks about bullying and like anti-LGBTQ bullying, basically. And this photo of me looking very happy is because I completed my master's last year in social justice and education. And I actually won a commendation for the research that I did into anti-racist education, basically. So that is my brief overview. This is just taken from Lancaster University website, and that's that there. Feel free to write questions in the chat as we go along, and then we'll come to them at the end. So like I said, we're going to turn things on its head and start at the end. So this is what we've achieved so far. This isn't the end. This is just where we've gotten to. So we have developed inclusive language guides in 30 different languages, which we are immensely proud of. And we'll talk about that in more detail in this session. We've also got a glossary in 32 languages. So in the glossary here, we have words in the source language of English normally, and then we have the translations that have been localized in 32 different languages. Words related to inclusion and diversity areas, things like words that maybe weren't so popular or not used as much in the past, but are gaining popularity now. Things like neurodivergence, like translating those into different languages. Also, like I'm based in Spain, and so often in American English, you might use the term people of color, a person of color, and translating that into Spanish really doesn't work. So in our glossary, we give like what the best, most authentic translation would be. What else have we done? We've completed a review and updated all of our internal web pages so that they're now using inclusive language in all of those web pages internally. We are increasingly involved in projects in game development projects from the start. So when there is discussion around marginalized characters, we are involved in the localization from localization point of view to give input on how that would work in reality. I'll also talk more about some of the tools that we've used to do that and how we work together. We have launched, I'm proud of so much, like we have achieved a lot in a short time. I should note, like, as I only started in February, I am by no means responsible for all of these achievements, and we've been working together in a team for over the past year. We've been focusing on inclusive language. One thing I have done since I've been here, though, is put together an inclusive language course, which is like an introduction to inclusive language. Again, I can show you a short snippet of that later on towards the end of the session. But we've also launched an internal website. It's like a one-stop shop. And we have a Slack channel, so for our internal communications, where we give updates on inclusive language and what we've been doing and what people should be mindful of as well. We have also aligned with our DEI, so our diversity, equity and inclusion teams internally, so that we're all on the same page and making sure that we're joining up some of our policies and our objectives as well. And that's the same for our play experience teams, which we call positive play. So they're the teams responsible for making sure that our players can play in spaces where they are having a positive and fair kind of experience. And then finally, we recruited the inclusive language specialist, which is me. But how did we get here? Okay, so before we go into the details of how we arrived at this point and achieved these results, I have a question for you. So hopefully Isabel will be able to share the poll. Yeah, fantastic, thank you. So this poll is totally anonymous. So what does inclusive language mean to you? Or do you feel really confident in what inclusive language is? Are you not that confident? Or are you very, very confident? So the three options there are: the first one, I don't know what inclusive language is. The second, I have a rough idea what it means, but please don't ask me. And then the third one, I know exactly what inclusive language means. So if you can vote just for one of those, please.
Almost everyone has voted still.
Ah, that's great. That was quick.
Yeah, let's let's give it a couple of more seconds.
Yeah, are you able to share the results once it's
Yeah,
done?
definitely. Yes. In a second, I'm gonna close the poll.
Fantastic.
Okay.
It's great. It's always great to pose this question just to get an idea of where everyone is.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna close to 3, 1, 2, and 3, and let's see what the result is. Okay, can you see the results?
Oh, I saw it for a second and now it's gone.
Oh, okay. Let's see again.
Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
So okay, so 3% don't know what inclusive language is. 64% have a rough idea of what it means, but don't ask them. And then 33% know exactly what inclusive language means, which is great. It's nice to have a spread there as well. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So we will go on. So this next page is kind of like my definition of inclusive language. So in general, in EA localization, we view language as an expression of social norms and values, and we realize that it's constantly changing. But part of that is the change to incorporating more inclusive language. So for me, sometimes I like a mixture. This is my teaching background. I like a mixture of mediums to understand things. And I thought this kind of diagram was quite useful to see inclusive language. So on the far left, we have non-inclusive language, and then an arrow pointing towards inclusive language on the right. That's our kind of end goal. So for me, non-inclusive language is around when people use a lot of stereotypes. Stereotypes can be in all different realms, but we have these kind of embedded in society and the language that we use. Frequently, this idea that supports the ideas like, for example, women are weak, or this idea that Asian children are really good at maths, and these kind of stereotypes which come out in everything that we do, including our language. That leads me to the next one, which is kind of the assumptions that we make. And I often use this example, and it's quite funny because I use this example of what happened in the past, because I have short hair at the moment, and then I used to have, for many, many years, I used to have long hair past my shoulders. And then when people made a lot of assumptions about me when I had longer hair, then I cut it off and people made different assumptions about me. And then earlier this year, I got married, and I had a special hairdo, like long hair again. And whilst I had long hair, someone asked me, "Oh, what does your husband do?" And just in those few simple words, "What does your husband do?" they had made an assumption that my partner was a man. And that was an incorrect assumption. So it's just an example of how the little words and choices that we make can actually exclude people and be non-inclusive. Also, thinking about moving towards inclusive language, one of the core parts here is that the language that we use shows that everyone is equally valued and respected as well. So that would mean that everyone can feel spoken to, basically. And really, when you narrow it down, we have to move from the non-inclusive language and those stereotypes towards thinking about individuals. How can we make sure that we're including all individuals and we're not reverting just to generic stereotypes of how we think people might be? I'm just trying to keep an eye on the chat as well in case there's anything, or making sure that everyone can see my presentation okay. So that's just popped up on the bottom there, is that we recognise that language isn't static but is constantly changing. And I'll be telling you a few of the things that we're doing at the moment to make sure that we're trying to keep up to date with those changes as well. So for us, it's really important to think about like our approach and why. Why is inclusive language important? So inclusive language allows us to resonate with a wider audience by speaking and writing in more impartial ways. So this is in general. I'm going to put up this next paragraph as well and just allow some time for this to sink in. By introducing inclusive language to our content and games, we can make all players feel welcome and respected, letting them feel immersed in authentic experiences. So this second paragraph is very specific to electronic arts and video games. But it's not just limited to video games or even entertainment. When you use inclusive language, you're able to widen out your potential audience and make sure that everyone is feeling spoken to and everyone is being included. So this isn't just about electronic arts. This is just good practice in general, making sure that we're using inclusive language. And there's also the business benefits to it as well. Like I say, inclusive language doesn't narrow your audience down, it actually widens it. So throughout this presentation, excuse me, I've just put some kind of strategic tips in there, things that I think are quite useful on this journey towards inclusive language. So the first strategic tip that I put is communicate the objective. So I can tell you a story about why I put this one here. So before I was actually in post as inclusive language specialist, there was some kind of negative comments and feedback on social media about how some of our games, a game in particular, wasn't very inclusive. And that was ultimately damaging to the business. What also happened is that some of our senior leadership team attended inclusion workshops where they were able to see the benefits and the impact as well. So this combination of the negative feedback from players and also attending the inclusion workshops that the leaders attended, they were able to see, right, we need to do more on inclusive language. From that, so this is really behind the communicate the objective, the kind of like step even before this is making sure that your leadership team are on board. Once the leader's on board, being able to communicate the objective of inclusive language to your team is really core to get everyone on board. And I think that's one of the challenges. I'll speak about the challenges later on, but one of the challenges that we've found as well. So if you're able to have this at the start, so leadership on board and then a clear communication of what you're trying to achieve and why it's important, then that is a really great starting place to include on your inclusive language journey as well. And having those kind of comms come out from leaders to show that this is being taken seriously as well. And that relates back to the importance of why we're doing it. So, inclusive language, we started off thinking about inclusive language as just being about gender. And then we kind of digged a little deeper and we were like, oh, inclusive language is not just about gender. And so we developed what we call our lenses, our inclusive language lenses. And these are the different areas that we cover. So we have ethnicity and race, gender identity, ability. We have this as a kind of broad name which incorporates physical disabilities, mental health, neuro divergence as well. I don't know if you just heard my doorbell went there, but I will continue. Faith, age, economic and social status, sexual orientation, marital status, cultural identity. All of these different lenses, all of these different areas that we focus on, all are part and parcel of inclusive language. And what we have, like, what I like about this diagram is that it makes you think about the different spectrum of realities, spectrum of identities that we all have. Some of us might just have, some of us are within this, whether you're in a majority or minority, but you always are included and you have a different view. But normally what happens in inclusive language is that we speak to the majority and not the minority. And that's why inclusive language is so important. So when you're talking about, I saw someone mentioned in the chat that they're looking at preparing or updating the inclusive language guide. So when you're talking about inclusive language, this is a general question. What are you talking about? So how far are you willing to go? This is my second strategic tip. Be clear on how far you are willing to go. Especially in localization, the conversation around inclusive language is very much normally about masculine, feminine, language interpretation, localization. But like we've seen in the last diagram, inclusive language goes a lot further than that. So being kind of positive at the start of what your end objective is so important. We started off at Electronic Arts with the task force. So at first it was the gender task force, and then it evolved into the inclusive language task force. Because, like I said, inclusive language is not just about gender. Even like I can think in Spanish, and I know in French and lots of languages, we have embedded kind of idioms that are offensive or discriminatory. So it's really important to think about what the approach is to those. So with our inclusive language task force, we had members who were given time to do different actions, like do the preparation work on the inclusive language guides, things like that. And that time was recognised. It's important to be clear on this work doesn't happen by itself. Generally, within the whole area of diversity and inclusion work, it's often left to the people who are marginalised and who are active, or people who are volunteering their time. But with this, and for it to be done effectively, we need people to be effectively resourced. So given that time so they can effectively do the work that they're being asked to do, rather than doing it on top of their day jobs as well. So how far are you willing to go? How far are you willing to resource inclusive language implementation as well? That was one of the tips I think it's really important to come up with. And ultimately what happened was that I now work with the task force, and it's so great to have the task force is made up of members from different teams within localization as well, and we're able to have different perspectives. And also my full-time role as an inclusive language specialist. So this resourcing is so important. And ultimately, people might talk about, yeah, we're inclusive and everyone's got like a inclusion policy normally, but we want to move from only words to actions as well. So words and actions, so that change can ultimately happen. Coincidentally, words and actions, moving into actions, I think is the phrase for Black History Month in the UK. So that's really important as well. The actual actioning of what we're doing. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. So I was talking about our inclusive language guides. So we currently have guides in 30 languages, and the guides are broken down into different sections. They all have our inclusive language logo at the side, at the top there, with like the embracing hand. And they all start with background information on inclusion in the region. So what that means is that they all start with giving a context of what legislation there might be in terms of equality in that particular country or region. Then we also include as standard what some of our general considerations for localization are. So taking into account that we know that inclusive language can sometimes take up a lot of space, literally when you're trying to translate in a kind of neutral way. So we have kind of considerations included in our guide to keep that in mind. And then the really, well, it's all really useful, but in the even more useful part is that we include specific examples on inclusion in that language. So each of our guides are written in English, and then within that we have examples of language in the given language. For example, in the Spanish guide. The Spanish guide is like 30 pages long. And within that, we have all of our different lens areas. We have broken down sections. So for example, excuse me, gender identity. And then we have some examples of what our preferred approaches for using non-binary language, when we use neutral language, giving examples of how we use neutral language as well. Then we also have, like I said, sorry, detailed sections on some or all of our lenses. So the Spanish guide is a really full guide, and we have examples in all of our lens areas that I spoke about. And then the other languages which are maybe less gendered have less less content in them as well. And as I say, we're updating. Language is constantly changing, especially inclusive language. So we're currently in the process of updating our guides as well. So let's see if I can give you like a little sneak peek of our website. So I think you should still be able to see this.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. So yeah, so this is just our website. So we just have a homepage explaining explaining what inclusive language is. Then at the top you can see like we've got the team, contact. So it's really important that we're contactable as much as possible. So we've got our email address for inclusive language. And then we've got our toolkit. So within the toolkit, we have got a link to our inclusive guides. We've got the glossary that I mentioned in 32 different languages. We've got a write inclusively. So this is just like a brief document on some tips on how to write inclusively for localization, things to keep in mind when you're writing, when the original kind of content is being written, normally in English in our case. Things to keep in mind for our localization teams. Then we also have a non-binary checklist, and I can show you that as well. And then we have, just at the bottom, we have our new inclusive language course as well. So these are only available internally at the moment. But this is one of the things that we hope to be able to do, is to share it more widely within with other companies as well. Then we also have information tab, which has loads of different kind of like latest news and articles. So videos, what our internal processes are, and then having a place for external guides. So there are companies out there that have got some really great kind of comprehensive guides as well. I'm not talking about localization, but just in general companies. And we keep those all located as we come across them. We have a link to them. So this website is basically like a one-stop shop for everything related to inclusive language in EA localization. And so that is the web page. And this is just an example of the non-binary characters checklist, as I said. So things like, will the player be able to choose their gender? So if that's a yes, okay, so will there be direct lines referring to the player if they choose to be non-binary, specifically using pronouns? Will there be different pronouns that we need to consider about localization? So these kind of questions that often don't get thought about until it comes to localization already, and then we go back with these questions. So what we've done is we've got this checklist at the start, so people can, in game development, start to think about these earlier on, rather than at the last minute have lots of lots of back and forth and questions, and like problems with budget as well, like that they realize that there'll be too many changes that needs to happen. And so these checklists and just the toolkit in general is really helpful for those initial planning of games. So here I just had the non-binary language in use. So this is our character Bloodhound, who is non-binary. So here it's just an example. So this is if you go to ea.com. I'm not sure I've got the webpage correct there actually. But if you, I'm sure if you type in EA and then Apex Legends, Bloodhound is from, you'll be able to access and then see in the different languages as well. So this is just an example in Spanish, but we have localized Bloodhound in a non-binary way in all of those languages that are available on the website as well. So yeah, if you want to have a look at that after the session as well and just see what we're doing. And that is open to everyone. Oh, great. Thank you. So efficient putting in the website there.
You're welcome.
So yeah, ea.com/games/Apex Legends. And then you'll find Bloodhound there. Moving on, I'm going through this really quickly, so we'll have lots of time for questions at the end, I think. And this is my third and final strategic tip, which is about sharing and collaborating. I think this is one of the few areas or industries in diversity and inclusion where like we're not secretive, we're not trying to be secretive. There are certain things that I can't disclose because of the game side of Element, but in terms of the inclusion work that we're doing, we want to spread the word, we want to share and get as many people using inclusive language as possible. And so that is also one of our key goals for this year, and trying to do that in a way where we're working alongside others. We've made we've achieved a lot, but we realize that there's still a long road ahead, and we want to do that in partnership with others, not by ourselves at all. And in particular, I just wanted to say about this is that we are kind of sharing internally. So we've got that internal website, and what we'd like to do in the future as well is have an external website, so where we'd be able to share our inclusive language guides, and also work just in general with other people in localization to make sure that we've got the same kind of, we're all working in the same way and producing the same standards as well, the same authentic kind of inclusive language. And that's where the SIG comes in that Alicia mentioned at the start, the special interest group, which I believe is going to start in January, which will be really great to work with as many people as possible there so that we can really embed inclusive language as widely as possible. So some of the challenges that we've come across. So firstly, experience of players. So funnily enough, this is, like I said, one of the things that kickstarted like inclusive language being a focus within the company, is that we had bad feedback, which was damaging to the company from players. But then going on, we really want to make sure that we're improving. So like trying to find up-to-date data on what the player experience is in terms of inclusive language is proving quite challenging. We have made an initial kind of survey, which is our results. It's looking promising at the moment. So we're glad to receive some positive feedback at the moment for our players in different languages. But we want to make sure that we're continually doing this. So this is one of our challenges, is finding like the most effective way to gather data from players on how their experience is in terms of inclusive language. And we want to make sure that that is improving. Another challenge has been connecting with wider staff. So working in a global company that is electronic arts, there are lots of different pockets of different countries, different time zones, and different teams. And we want to get to as many different teams as possible. Going back to that first strategic tip about getting leaders on board and communicating, that is really helpful. But sometimes it can be a slow process to make sure that you are getting to every single pocket of the company as well. So that has been a challenge, in making sure that everyone is on board with what's happening. Kickback is just in general in this area where you receive, or we have received, like some criticisms or comments around why do we need to do this, things, especially with inclusive language, like, oh, that doesn't sound natural to me, is a frequent comment that we get in this area. And being able to distinguish, like, does it not sound natural? Is it just that it's not commonly heard? And making sure that you're distinguishing, because going again back to that strategic tip, is that we want to get everyone on board and make sure that we are keeping to our objective and knowing how far we want to go. So we've decided how far we want to go, and we want to keep as many people with us as possible. So for kickback, it's great to be sure of what your goal is, your objective is, and then also knowing who your allies are as well, who are able to share and support your message and spread your message. Another challenge has been around recruiting experts, so subject matter experts. For example, looking for like a proficient Russian expert in kind of race or gender identity has proved challenging due to a lot of the legislation in Russian, and also policies within the company as well. So that has been a challenge, but it's possible, mainly through lots of research online, and also word of mouth is a really great way of overcoming and trying to find as many experts as possible. And I'm happy to share contact details as well of people who are looking for experts. And then resources. I think that's always the ultimate. Being able to resource this work rather than being given to a particular employee who's really keen and eager, but already has a really heavy workload. And then this kind of diversity or inclusive language project is a great project that they're really excited about. But then as the workload kind of increases, the inclusive language kind of gets deprioritized. So making sure that you're resourcing and you're giving time and money to the people who are charged with doing that inclusive language work is really important in making progress in this area. And then I think we're going to move on to my last slide, which is around our focus area for this year, this fiscal year 2023. So our guides and glossary, yep, we've produced them, but like I said, language is constantly evolving. And so we are currently reviewing our guides, and then we'll also be reviewing the glossary as well to make sure that it's up to date. We want to make sure that inclusive language is included from the start of all game development projects until the end. We've had a great start, but we want to make sure that it's consistent as well. Like I say, wider reach within the company, which has maybe been a little bit of a challenge, and making sure that everyone is on board with our inclusive language message. Again, the challenge, like I said, around the external consultants, we want to constantly build up those external consultants that were able to easily find the right person for the project that we're working on. Machine learning is progressing well. Don't ask me questions about this because it's not my area of expertise, but I have spoken to people in machine learning. So we've got a couple of different projects, and one of the projects on machine learning is going really well, where we've done tests on basically about feeding in inclusive language data to make sure that the right results, inclusive language is coming out. And so far the pilot has been promising, I've been told on that. And then the inclusive language industry standards, again, I'm really looking forward to being on the SIG and having lots of people taking part in that so we can reach agreement. And then finally, training and certification. So one of our goals was to create an inclusive language course, which I'm pleased to say is now complete and was launched at the start of October. And just to finish off, I can just show you a short clip of a video. You see me with long hair in it, of part of what that course entails. So let me just switch here. Here we go.
Non-binary and gender-neutral language. What's the difference? Non-binary refers specifically to gender identity. For example, bloodhound is non-binary and uses pronouns in English, they, them. In Spanish, I might say usa ella y ellas. But we use gender-neutral language when we don't know the gender of the person. We're speaking to a group of mixed gender people.
I'll leave it there as just a teaser. Don't want to play that again, sorry. Is this the end? No, it's just kind of where we've got to so far on our journey. And at that point, I think it's a great time to share my contact details. So that's my email address. And leave time for some questions. I know there's been some questions that have come.
Yeah, there are questions both in the QA box and in the chat, actually quite a lot. So would you like to start with the ones in the chat, or?
Let me have a look. So are the inclusive language guides accessible? If yes, could you please share a link? I'm afraid they're not. They're only internal at the moment and used by our shared with our vendors. And this is one of our goals. I'm not sure if it's going to be this fiscal year or the next one, but we want to share our inclusive language guides, and we want to, more than anything, we want to have inclusive language guides that everyone can use.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a question from Maria Rodriguez. Do you have guidelines on inclusive language for your LSP and vendors?
Yeah, we do. So we have a really great vendor management team. And so we share our inclusive language guidelines with them, and then we keep them up to date with changes that are made in the guides, and then also just changes in general that we're doing in inclusive language. We also are hoping to share, so the course that I just spoke about, to share that with our vendors as well in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question, Maria.
It's a question from Serge. I'm going to read it out loud. Could you expand a little on the process for the development of a language guide? Did you divide the work per lens and have different people been working on different sections?
That's a great question, Serge. So these guides were actually put together just before I came into role. and my understanding is that it is done differently depending on the language. So some of them were done internally through people in the task force who did loads of research. Like the task force are amazing and who have put a lot of time and effort into making sure that our inclusive language guides are accurate and authentic. And then with some people in the task force where we didn't have the languages, we did contract out some of those guides to external vendors, and then we would have one person work on the whole guide, so looking at all lenses. What we're looking at now with the review is that we're getting subject matter experts for each different lens in each different language, so that we can have even more detail into each lens, and so that it's even more accurate and authentic as well.
Wow. What is the difference between equally valued and individually valued? Could you give some examples?
Oh yeah, well, with the equally valued, I'm talking about in general, we want everyone to be equally respected. So this was in the diagram when I was speaking about getting towards inclusive language, and then not so much valued individually, but recognizing people as individuals. So equally valued would be things like trying to use gender neutral language so that everyone can be included. Individually, talking to the individual would be about knowing exactly what that person's gender identity would be, and then using their appropriate, then speaking to them as an individual rather than in general in a neutral way.
Yeah. Lots of questions. How do you approach inclusive language for territories less receptive? I can imagine Russia, Middle East, and many more. That's from Serge.
Yeah, but we still have, it's still the same. So like I gave the example of like one of the challenges of trying to find kind of experts or subject matter experts in Russian, but they still exist. We still have our guides, and we still want to be able to have inclusive language in all of our languages that we localize into. And so we take it, at the moment it's on a project by project, step by step basis, but we work with the foundation that we're localizing inclusively for all of our territories. Then sometimes the decision might be taken out of our hands if there's a studio decision it depends on a project by project basis. But in areas that are less receptive, we still have those guidelines, and we still have that base, and we still have the subject matter experts who we're working with who can develop our authentic perspective of what inclusive language is in that language.
What are the domains beside video games do you think inclusive language is becoming more common?
I think with this in particular, like I showed, like in the information part of our internal website, we have it's a section for external guides in inclusive language. So this is important, not just in kind of different industries, but in all industries, because of the company where people work. We want everyone as an employee wants to be included and respected. And so lots of those guides are actually like from various different spheres, from technology to education to health, because everyone wants to be included. So it can be, I think, a range of domains where inclusive languages is going to be is used increasingly.
Okay, there are quite some questions in the chat. How about we take a couple of them? We still have 6 minutes. So for example, what does the faith category exactly mean?
Oh yeah, we put faith in there, but it kind of covers like faith, religion, belief, non-beliefs as well, kind of that sphere where people might be marginalized.
And could you speak a bit more about the aim of talking to the majority and not the minority?
I think what I said there was we often speak to the majority rather than the minority. And what we want to do is speak to everyone, the majority and the minority. So whereas if you are like in a minority, you're marginalized because of a disability or excluded in some way because of your faith, your religion, your belief. We want those people who are minoritized, who are marginalized and put on the edges, to actually be included in all of the language that we talk about. So rather than speaking to the majority, we're speaking to everyone, the majority and the minority.
And a question from Camila. What has the feedback from players been like, specifically from Spanish-speaking players, in regards to the use of inclusive language in your games?
We haven't got, so like I said, we're just starting out on we've done an initial survey on inclusive experience of players. We have got quite a few responses so far, but we haven't fully analysed those yet. So I can't tell you, I'm afraid, on Spanish-speaking players in particular. But that's something that I'd like to come back to, like when we do have more data to give feedback on. This is the next stage. This is how the response. This is what the response has been from players. And
a question, a remark from Stephanie, who actually last year published an article on inclusive language in software localization. So she says, have you been faced with reviewing all texts that are still in use, or can you concentrate on new content only? Because she writes, she says, resistance to inclusive language will be more solid when much costly rework is involved.
So I think that's a really good point, which I think I understand, and jump in if I'm wrong, Stephanie, around reviewing kind of materials or text content, like legacy content, things that's already there and published. What we've been focusing on so far is making sure that all of our current content is up to date, and all of our new content which is coming out is up to date and is inclusive, uses inclusive language. There is definitely a lot more work to do in making sure that old texts and that legacy content is updated as well. And that is one thing that we'd really like to do. But it is another thing that comes into resourcing as well, like having the time and resources to go back to all of that old content as well. And it's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and then a final question from Serge. And of course, we all want to know what's in your checklists and your glossaries, and we can't wait for you to, share them with us. But Serge says, can you expand on what is in the non-binary checklist?
There wasn't much more. I think I showed you most of it on the screen, to be honest. But yeah, just those main questions on thinking about what your intention is from the player point of view, if they will have options to select different genders, how will other people in the game be talking to them as they use different genders, and those kind of things. Please do, I think a really great way for us to get more information out. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So my name is Amanda Hawthorne on there. And then also through this SIG that Gala are putting together, where we can hopefully in the future share our content and those checklists and our glossaries, and have a group kind of standardized glossary checklist and guides and things as well.
Yeah. That's going to be great. Thank you so much, Amanda. It was really interesting, and I could see that everybody was really following closely every word you said. There have been so many interesting questions, and I see lots of very positive comments in the chat. Thank you, and thank you to all attendees who joined this webinar. Before we go, a small reminder, if you want to join the SIG, you can either follow our website, our newsletter, or you can write directly to Alicia, membership@gala-global.org. When I close the webinar, you'll see a small form. It's a post-webinar survey. It takes literally 5 seconds to fill it in. Let us know what you think of this session. And as always, your feedback will help us refine our webinar program. Finally, before you all log off, I want to remind you, we have a call for proposals that ends on October 21st, which is next week, Friday, for our conference in Dublin next year, and everybody is welcome to take a look at the call for proposals and maybe submit something. We also have another call for proposals for the soapbox format. Sorry, and that closes on December the 9th, I think. Next week, we have another great webinar. We have the IKEA team. They're going to talk about their localization workflow and how they use some kind of Allen key to make everything happen. And if you bought IKEA furniture, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But thank you again, Amanda. It was a pleasure, and we're looking forward to have you on the SIG. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Have a good day, depending on where you are, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks very much.